Hello, sinners. I just wanted to drop in and tell you that My Horror Confessional is now part of the Ghoulish Podcast Network. In addition to producing podcasts, Ghoulish is also a publisher. Ghoulish Books has published dozens of horror books that have gone on to receive award recognition and even film adaptation treatments. Browse their spooky offerings over at ghoulish.rip and use discount code CONFESSIONAL for 10% off your order. And remember, ghouls, live spooky, die spooky. Hello, everyone. My name is Miguel Myers. Welcome to My Horror Confessional, where every week I'll have a guest come on and talk about one classic horror movie that they haven't seen and why. We'll discuss the movie, the actors, and probably get off topic quite a bit. Once I believe that they are properly atoned, I will absolve them of their horror movie sin. Today in the confessional, we have a returning guest, Hilary Myers. Hilary, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Miguel. It's so great to finally be invited back. I've been trying to get back on the show for a long time, but you're just so popular and cool. Everybody wants to hang out with you.
Well, I'm really excited that you came back to record. I think the last time you were on, we did that Christmas movie, was it? Um Dia de la Bestia. Uh
Hmm.
that was a lot of
Yep.
fun. And then what was the doll one that we did? Dolly Dearest.
Was it Dolly
Yeah.
Dearest?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. But it has been a long time since you've been on. So, do you even remember how we found out about this movie, My Boyfriend's Back?
I've known about it
Yeah.
forever, to be honest. I've always known about this movie. I remember it coming out. My mom, I think, actually liked that song. Do you remember that song? My boyfriend's back and you're gonna get in trouble. Hey now. That one?
I'm not familiar. Is there another bar you can sing?
I feel like I'm
No.
being mocked. I'm not really
I
sure
love your
why,
voice
even though I'm doing like
and I
cool
wanted to hear it.
things.
Yeah, I thought it was really fun. So let's back up a second here. Hillary is on to confess her sin of never having watched the underrated classic horror film, Zom-Com, really, My Boyfriend's Back from 1993. Nice, real nice. So Patreon members are getting a real treat today because the pictures just keep on changing. The background pictures. Is that Ryan Gosling again? Is that another Gos?
It's also Ryan
He just
Gosling. Yep. And this time he's peeking seductively over my shoulder like he was wondering why you're talking with his
I
girl.
don't like that he is positioned behind you. That's not my favorite thing that's happening right now. So I'm gonna keep moving. Um, so yeah,
Better keep moving. My boyfriend Ryan
your
will come
boyfriend
for you.
Ryan's back. Awesome. Uh, yeah, I'm already flustered. I forgot where I was going with that. What did I say?
Asked how we found or how we heard
Yeah.
about my boyfriend's
Okay,
back.
so we went recently to the theater to watch Lisa Frankenstein, and they've played this trailer before Lisa Frankenstein. The Alamo Drafthouse plays has like a program before, and they played it, and I was like, oh, that'd be great. And I think you mentioned wanted to come on the show and do it. And I thought that was a great idea. Um, but you said that you've known about the movie forever, or at least since it came out, whatever.
Yeah. It was never the kind of movie. So my parents always had this idea of what a quality film was. And they were always trying to make sure that I was kind of taking in the right kinds of things. So they didn't think that they thought video games were going to rot your brain. So I never had like a PlayStation or any kind of controllers or anything like that. There were certain movies that they just thought weren't very good movies. And this was one of them because I think that they really just didn't particularly see the point in horror. And if you watch the movie, it's not very horror. It doesn't have a lot of horror elements like some of the other like schlocky, gory kind of movies, but still it was in that category. So I just don't think it was something that ever would have wanted to rent or go to see when it was in theaters.
Yeah, this movie it wears the trappings of a horror film. Like it has like obviously, right, the guy is a zombie and all that sort of stuff, but it's really at the heart of it a movie about a creepy dude who's infatuated with a girl.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those like low self-awareness high school crush movies.
Yeah.
And it's actually kind of, well, I mean, we're going to get into it more once we talk about it, but yeah, it's one of those movies where a creepy guy gets positioned as being a hero because we're supposed to cheer for him because he's relatively cute and he's introduced as being a quote unquote good guy. But
Well, I want to put
yeah,
a pin in that relatively cute comment, first of all, because watch your mouth. But no, but second of all, I don't agree about that. So we'll get into that in a second. So you've never seen this movie. There Zom-Coms or zombie romantic comedies. It's been a bit of a thing, right? There's a bunch of movies like that. There's like what, Warmed Hearts or what the heck's that one with the zombie and Warm
Warm
Bodies?
Bodies.
Yeah, Warm Bodies, stuff like that. And then there's a couple of other ones. I mean, I would say Anna and the Apocalypse would be kind of like a zombie romantic comedy as well. So that's musical. But this was one that I thought I had seen, but I don't have any recollection of it. Um, I think it was a lot of fun. I think I enjoyed it a lot. But let's go ahead and get into it. So this was directed by who was that?
This is Sam Rockwell. For those who have the Patreon, you will now see another different image, which is the amazing 5'8", completely underrated Sam Rockwell, an amazing dancer and even more amazing
Speaking of
actor.
underrated,
Thank
this movie was directed by Bob Balaban. He was an underrated TV director, but he did do some films, including 1989's Parents, which is about like a serial killer parents sort of thing. And he's also an actor. He was in Gosford Park, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Capote. Have you seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind?
It's been a long time, but yeah, I have seen it.
Recommend? Oh, my thumb's not visible there. Can't see my thumb right.
I would I mean, I think I'd say sure if you have time and you want and you like alien movies. I don't remember it making such a huge impression. And there are so many amazing movies out there. There's a lot of alien movies out there. There's a lot of drama, big government sort of, I don't know. I wouldn't, from my recollection of it, I wouldn't necessarily say rush and rent it, but if you want to see it, go for it because I think it was
Yeah,
good.
for me, like sci-fi has always not always been my favorite, so that's kind of like why I stayed away from it. But I've heard people say it's kind of scary, so it's been on the list, but I haven't seen it yet.
I can't really remember, but I feel like it was scary a little bit the way that E.T. was scary in that you never
No, no,
watched
I
E.T.,
watched
did
ET.
you?
Yeah, is it the Reese's Pieces that scared you?
It's towards the end of the movie when the government gets involved, and then suddenly you're not just dealing with this because the ET is, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen ET, I might ruin some things. ET is getting sick, and you're feeling like, oh God, we have to save him, and then the government gets involved, and that just makes everything worse. And then you have to like run from the government agents who you'd think would be helping you. And I feel like Close Encounters of the Third Kind has that same, who do I not trust more? Is it the aliens with the spaceship that's super scary and completely out of my comfort zone? Or is it these people that I'm supposed to be able to trust that are doing things behind my back that are that are operating in a way to kind of fool or pull the wool over the eyes of the American public and are possibly not very trustworthy either.
You got this all as a preteen or a teenager when you saw it.
No, I didn't. I didn't see it when I was a teenager. I saw E.T. when I was a teenager, but I don't think I saw Close Encounters of the Third Kind until much
Okay.
later.
So that actually reminds me, I forgot to ask you. So last couple times we that you were on, we talked about like your background with horror and what you liked and what you disliked and how you've kind of come around on it mostly or partly. But this is probably the first like romantic-ish movie that we've done, probably. Oh, there's been some sexy stuff, but it's a rom-com. So what is your
When you say we,
yeah, yeah,
you mean the show, or do you
talking
mean
about the
you and
show.
me?
This is the first rom-com that we've seen, you and I. But on the show. So what is your like background with romantic comedies for the people who are listening? Is that something you enjoy?
Romantic comedies in general, or like with
No,
the
romantic
horror
comedies in
element?
general.
Okay, because I feel like there's a huge difference between the two. Romantic comedies in general, I think
You have a kind of a love-hate relationship, no?
I used to love them a lot. They used to be some of my favorite. I used to just eat them up, especially the high school ones, like She's All That, or stuff like that. I used to think was just amazing. 10 Things I Hate About You was one of my favorite movies of all time when I was in high school. And the thing is that afterwards you start so I read this book called You Play the Girl, which is about depictions of or characters for women in film, and it talks about how there's this emphasis for women of finding the perfect guy, the mate that you're going to spend the rest of your life with, and then that's the end of the movie, because once you found that perfect guy, then your life is basically over. There's no other journey for you to take. There's no other development or aspiration that you could possibly have except finding a family, making a family with this man. So now I see that, and I just see the exact same kind of depictions of women being kind of desperate to find love, and then ultimately finding some guy who kind of treats them like shit, but then eventually comes around to them. And it's a bit nauseating now, but I used to just love them so much when I was
Mm.
younger. I feel like horror actually does a better job of being romantic, in all
Oh, that's
honesty.
interesting. Why do you say that? Yeah, back that up.
I feel like I feel like horror puts people in more weirdly realistic situations once you accept the underlying premise, whatever that premise is. So we talked about Anna and the Apocalypse, and the love story there is between this guy. Well, there's two kind of love stories, but there's no, I take it back. There's three. So there's Anna and the guy that is her best friend, and she loves him and he loves her romantically. And there's this mismatch between them. And then there's this kind of like sexy, flirtatious thing between her and this other guy who she was really into, but now she kind of hates because he turned out to be kind of a dickhead. And then there's this love story between these two people, these other two kids who are absolutely in love with each other in that puppy dog, high school sweetheart sort of way. And all three of those interactions and relationships seem very realistic to me. And Anna's reaction to those two relationships, and the teenagers who are just madly in love, their like completely spot on and pretty healthy and wholesome like reactions. Even the one where she's with this guy who she thought was kind of a dick, she treats him like he was kind of a dick. She doesn't say, "Oh, you rejected me, but now I'm desperately still hair flipped, falling for you." You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
amazing. So I feel like it's actually kind of better.
I love Anna and the Apocalypse. You just want to talk about Anna and the Apocalypse?
I would love to. That's such a
Yeah.
good movie.
Um, all right. So getting back to this, let me just say it over again for my editing. Um, so this was directed by Balaban. He was a TV director, but did some films, including 1989's Parents. But he was an actor as well. He did Gosford Park and Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Capote. I'll edit all that to make it sound good. All right. It was written by Dean Lorey. He does a bunch of TV stuff now, but he did write the screenplay for Jason Goes to Hell. So there's that. You've seen that one with me.
Qualities.
Remember we saw the whole franchise with Matthew and Anna. This was produced by Sean S. Cunningham, and he was the producer and director of the first Friday the 13th and so many other horror films. He's actually, a horror legend. And then this music was also done by Harry Manfredini. And I just wanted to talk about Harry Manfredini for just a second. He did the soundtrack to the original Friday the 13th, 1980. And from then on, he just went on to do, at this point, I think he scored over 100 films. But he did The Children, Swamp Thing, Friday the 13th Part 2 and 3. I think the whole franchise he did. The Hills Have Eyes Part 2, Slaughter High. The 80s were very, very busy for him. Um, Wishmaster, The Omega Code, Jason X, Wolves of Wall Street. Uh, and then most recently, he did the Friday the 13th, the game soundtrack as well. And so, yeah, he's just been prolific and just an absolute legend when it comes to soundtracks. So, starring Andrew Lowry as Johnny Dingle. Andrew was also in Buffy the Vampire Slayer and School Ties. Now, I think that he was completely miscast in this role. I don't think he is particularly handsome or cute or even charming. But you said that he was, I forget what nice looking, whatever the heck it was you said. But so you feel that he was good in this role?
I think you're asking if he was miscast mostly from a looks perspective, but also slightly from a
Yeah.
charm perspective. And I think from a high school girl perspective, I think he's perfectly cast. Um, he's not supposed to be the most handsome guy at the school. He's supposed to be the guy that looks decent and who's got a good personality. And he does for a high school
Yeah.
kid. Um, he's got, his teeth are straight. He doesn't have braces. He doesn't have acne. His haircut is fine. There's no dandruff. He wears decent clothes. I mean, compared to the guys that I remember in high school, like he's not coming into school with his hair like wet or like doesn't have black nail polish on and like some like badass, I'm so cool for you, too cool for you kind of goth boy attitude. Like he's actually, as far as high school boys go, pretty presentable, but he's also not the like guy that you fall madly in love with and are crushing on all 4 years of high school that you want to you're excited that if he even knows your name. He's not that guy, but he's like a perfectly decent choice. As far as charm goes, I think he has this kind of like asshole high school boy charm of like driving, riding his bike through his neighbor's flower bed. And I feel like that's the kind of thing that's like mildly risque. Like he's kind of a bad boy, but not really because he sort of apologizes as he's riding through them. And everybody on his block knows his name. So he's obviously an affable enough guy.
I'd like
So
to go back for a little bit. Slander against guys who wear black nail polish.
I dated one of those guys
Yeah.
actually, who then stalked me for 10 years, sort of mildly.
Well, that took a turn.
So you don't get
So
to.
I will be dancing my way past that. And okay, I would just say agree to disagree. I don't think he's really charming, and I don't think he's particularly handsome. But I understand what you're saying about like, for example, like what's his name? Ferris Bueller, the dude who plays Ferris Bueller. I don't think he was like the biggest, toughest. He's just a little scrawny kid, and he's kind of handsome in that movie, but he's extremely charming.
I think Ferris Bueller is an example of how you see kids once you're too old to really remember high school.
Mm.
I think that Ferris Bueller is entirely, probably 5 times wittier than any guy, even the wittiest, most on top of his game guy that I went to high school
Okay.
with. I knew a guy, I was deeply and madly in love with him. He was definitely not as cute as the guy who was cast as the lead role, and he never talked.
So he was
Never.
perfect.
He just had an air. He was like, probably. He just had this air of mystery, and I know he listened to Nirvana and Creedence Clearwater, and I was like, ooh, he's got a truck. Like high school standards are low standards.
Okay. Then it's also starring Tracy Lind as Missy McLeod. She was in class of 1999 and Fright Night Part 2. Da
He was not a high school student. No girl
well,
looks that
yeah,
good in high school.
Andrew Lowry was like 25. Like they were both in their 20s. Like she was like 23, or it might have been reversed. But yeah, they were way past high school age, both of them. Um, Danny Zorn as Eddie, Edward Herman as Mr. Dingle, Edward Herman is Max in The Lost Boys, but for you and me, Richard Gilmore from Rory, which is what I call the Gilmore Girls. Well, I remember
Mhm.
when Hillary first
Yeah.
started watching Gilmore Girls, I was like, nah, it's stupid, whatever. Like, have you seen that TikTok of like guys and their girlfriends when their girlfriends are watching
Mhm.
reality shows
Reality
and the guys
shows
are
or
like, I don't
something.
want to watch that, and then little by little they're getting closer, and then they're like fully involved. That was me with the Gilmore Girls, which I just call Rory. And I am extremely pissed how that ended. The Netflix series and just terrible choice that she made. I'm really disappointed in Rory.
Oh,
Yes.
Miguel, come on.
Well, I'm not gonna get into it. We gotta
Don't don't let her break your
okay.
heart
All
again,
right.
okay?
Mary Beth Hurt as Mrs. Dingle. She was in The Exorcism of Emily Rose and The World According to Garp. This was the film debut of Matthew Fox as Buck Van Patten. And of course, everybody knows him from Lost and a bunch of other movies after that. Philip Seymour Hoffman as Chuck Bronsky. Obviously, he was an Oscar winner for Capote, which he did act with, later his career with the director of this movie, who was also in Capote. Um, he did The Master, Moneyball, Schenectady, New York, Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, Punch Drunk Love, Almost Famous, The Talented Mr. Ripley, Magnolia, The Big Lebowski, Boogie Nights, and Twister. Like he was a legend, gone like way too soon. I feel like I was just starting to get into him when he passed away.
Mhm.
Austin Pendleton as Dr. Bronson. Do you remember where this guy was from? I was going to ask you while we were watching it, but I wanted to save it.
I I couldn't remember where he was from, but I could remember little bits of him being a character in other movies, but it's one of those, hey, it's that guy from
Yeah,
that thing.
it's
That's the kind of
it's definitely
actor
a
he
bit
is.
or character actor, but I'll give you a hint. We went to Alamo Draft House this past Thursday and saw a queer film theory, and he was in one of the movies that we talked about. And you're looking it up right now, you cheater. I'm just going to tell you, My Cousin Vinny. He was the
Okay.
stuttering lawyer in My Cousin Vinny.
Oh, that's right. That's right. He was a stuttering lawyer who asked about the reading glasses. Oh,
Yeah, I
that
think he
poor
did a great
man.
job in it. Also starring Cloris Leachman as Maggie, the zombie expert. Cloris Leachman was a legend. The Last Picture Show. She was young. She was Frau Blucher in Young Frankenstein, which is one of my favorite movies. She was in Spanglish. She was in over 280 films, and she passed away in 2021 at 95 years old. And this also had Matthew McConaughey in it as Guy Number Two. The same year, he would star in Dazed and Confused and would catapult to stardom. And this also would have been, I believe, the film debut of Renee Zellweger, but her scenes were cut. So she didn't make it in. So the movie starts with some cool comic book art, but I don't know if you noticed this, but on the cover of the comic book, there's what's her name? Missy? Is Missy her name? Missy and Johnny are on the cover of the comic book, and they have bubbles coming out of the head. And like Johnny is thinking, is that who is that now? Ryan
Ryan
Reynolds.
Reynolds.
Okay, they did.
He's a
Yeah,
bit more
but
casual. He's on the
he's
couch.
looking extra sexy. Thought bubbles, thought bubbles. So Missy is thinking about Johnny with like hearts and bubbles around him, but Johnny is thinking of Missy, and she's on a table on a platter, naked with food around her and an apple in her mouth. Very weird. Very weird. Um, so Johnny Dingle is so it's a voiceover. He's been in love with Missy McLeod since they were kids. At her sixth birthday party, he was too scared to give her a gift that he had saved up a year to buy. When she opened it, he was sure that she would fall hopelessly in love with him, which is foreshadowing, right? Because something happens later on in the movie. And then a kid goes up to him and like he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. So everybody's like moves on. The time's passed, and they're at this party, and this kid comes up to him and says, "What are you looking at, dirtbag?" And at that point, I was like, I wonder if that's Chuck. And then he says the same thing to him later on, and it is Chuck. It was, which is really cool. So the basically the story starts the day after Missy breaks up with her boyfriend of 6 years, Buck. And this guy, he looks like he's mid-30s. I forgot to see how old um was it Matthew Fox? I forgot to check how old he would have been in 1983, but he looked like in his mid-30s. Let's see. He was born in 66.
He,
So he was 27 years old. Yeah.
mhm. Well, probably 26 when they
Yeah,
shot the
yeah, yeah.
movie, right? Because I think I looked all of them up based on 92, which is when I assumed they were filming, and they were all like 24 to 26
Yeah.
years old. But he just has one of those faces that he just looks menacing,
You think so? Like just like a piece of shit?
I think. I think he has that bad guy. I think he should have been cast permanently as the boyfriend that you break up with once you realize he's really a douchebag.
Yeah. Well, to be honest though, well, no, yeah, you're right. Um,
I am.
I, you know what?
I
I just
am
leave it at
right.
that. For me, Matthew, I never watched Lost, so I'm not like all too familiar on Matthew Fox. So when everybody was like, "Oh, this is like," well, yeah, they were like, "Oh, this is like his film debut." I'm like, I don't know who that is. I had to look him up. Are you familiar with Matthew Fox? His au revoir?
I mean, I'm a little familiar with him. I would see bits and pieces of Lost, but I never watched a full episode and I never got into it as a series. So
Yeah,
if it was his, it was not, it was far more exciting seeing Matthew McConaughey and Philip Seymour Hoffman.
yeah, same. So first thing that Johnny says to Missy in school is he turns around and he says, "You look good today," in a physically perfect, newly available kind of way. And yeah, kind of
Gross.
gross. And he's in class and he fantasizes about Missy coming onto him, straddling him in the desk.
Yep.
Then we get a scene of him and Missy in bed in the gym with the whole class watching, and then the
The whole
whole school
school
watching,
watching.
right, right. And then we get a there's a
Referee.
referee, there's a penalty, there's like a dick too small joke, right? Like not a regulation size dick. Um, and then after, so he wakes up, and then after class, before he can ask her out, Buck appears with the school band and his friend Chuck. And Chuck looks like a goon, right? Philip Seymour Hoffman. His like shoulders are hunched, and he's like just like ready for a fight. One of those dudes are just ready for a fight.
He was
You think
overplaying.
so?
That just felt like such an overplayed character. He was so obviously a bad guy. I saw him and I was like, "Oh, Chuck, you die first, don't you?" Like I just knew it. He was obviously the guy that was gonna get murdered. That he's the guy in the horror film that you get that they kind of ease you into the murdering with. They're like, "You're not gonna care that this person dies,"
Yeah.
and that was Chuck.
I just thought I've never thought of Philip Seymour Hoffman as the street tough, but I think he played it pretty decently. Might if not overacted.
I think it was harder to see him as a street tough as he got older and he put on some weight and stuff because he started playing different kind of roles. But when he was young and skinny, I mean, he'd always had this kind of, he could definitely play a menacing character
Hmm.
very well.
Yeah, I think
Are we, by the way, going to get back to all of the misogyny from the beginning couple of scenes, or is that for later in the show?
let's go right now.
Okay. Because the beginning couple of scenes are so overtly chauvinistic. It is, it was hard to continue watching the film
Could,
with those opening
could you
scenes.
specific like what opening scenes that are you talking about? Or I mean like what specifically?
So, so first of all, there's this there's the comic book itself, which is him like fantasizing about
Hmm.
this girl. And she doesn't really have a personality. And I don't think she ever does throughout the entirety of
She
the
really doesn't
movie.
know.
There's no there's no arc for her. She's just this hottie. At some point, he does talk about how he likes her for other reasons, but I think that that scene doesn't come in until almost the end of the movie. So in the beginning, it's just she was so pretty and she was somebody that people just wanted to be around. So I got her a gift when I was 6 years old or whatever. And then I held on to it because I'm a creep who couldn't get over this girl for what would that have been, 12 years if they're seniors in high school now,
Yeah,
18 years old. And I just continued to fantasize about her. And she just, as he said, filled out in all the right ways.
that's right. Yeah.
And I totally understand that, as a teenage boy, his fantasy is going to be about sex. So her, like when he realizes it's a dream, right? When she straddles him in class, he's like, well, this can't possibly be happening. This is obviously a dream. So, okay, she's straddling him in class, but then he continues on with his dream of betting her in front of the entire school. And the worst part about it is the look on her face while she's in bed. Like she's just a participant in this. She's not excited to see him. She's not enjoying herself. She's not, anticipating it. She's just there because she has to be there because her mom made her sign up for this particular sport or some shit like that. Like it is so like the look on her face does not look like somebody who wants to have sex. And it honestly reminds me so much of so many encounters I had with guys where I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to have sex with them or not, but it sort of felt like I kind of had to because I kind of committed already, or I kind of committed to go so far. I kind of committed to kissing them or whatever. And it's like, well, now I'm in it. I can't really get out of it. That whole scene was so disgusting and awful. I hated it. I hated it. I understand that for him it was about crippling social anxiety and not measuring up, but the way that he put her in the bed and he was going to be on top of her and fucking her was going to be a sport was just disgusting.
Yeah, I can see that. I'm sorry that you were placed in those situations. That sounds really tough.
Nah. I mean, a majority of women are placed in some situation like that, so it's not exactly unique. And it's funny because when we were talking about this, you were kind of rattling off all these movies that these guys had been in. It's like, of course, this is the kind of movie they made. It's the same old people who make all the same movies, who don't have any kind of new perspective and don't have any idea that maybe they should put like a somewhat well-rounded female character in the cast, or at least put a small scene where she does something nice to make him like her for some reason other than the fact that she has blonde hair and apparently filled out with big tits. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I liked about um Lisa Frankenstein, is that they
Uh,
had a well-rounded female character um who made different decisions than a male character would. It's kind of like what was the movie we saw yesterday? Not Brave, Damsel,
Damsel.
right. Damsel, which is a Netflix movie, and it's about well, I don't want to spoil it too much, but it's basically a girl against a dragon movie. And she makes different choices than I think male characters would have made it in it. And it just was refreshing and cool to see that. And, this My Boyfriend's Back was made in 1993, and they just weren't taking chances like that, which is, you know, there wasn't that type of representation for women or people of color or, anything other than white people, white men basically. So,
I sort of disagree with that though, because I feel like the whole pendulum, there's been, as I say, first wave, second wave, third wave feminism. There have been swings of feminism, but then there's always there's some, oh God, I forget what it's called, backlash. That's the word I can't think of. There's some backlash. So from what I remember, there was like a lot more female representation and female power, I think in the 80s and early 90s, but then there was some backlash against that into this more like super traditional female girlfriend stereotype. So, you know, you I think that's very common to say, "Oh, we used to be so bad back then." And it's like, well, not always. people have always had the ability to make, I feel like it almost absolves people from making good decisions in the past. It's like, well, they didn't know any better because it was the
Mhm.
90s. And it's like, no, you had role models that you could have followed and
Oh
you
yeah, I
just
agree with
didn't.
that. It doesn't absolve them of that. But yeah, I agree. What do you know of any movie, or can you think of any movies where you can feel like this wave of feminism in the 80s and 90s? Are you talking, oh, like maybe like something like um A League of Their Own?
A League of Their Own was really, really cool, but you know what is a weirdly interesting movie that I just remember? And it's a little, it's definitely got its problematic, very problematic moments. But Labyrinth, do you remember that movie with David Bowie and
Jennifer
what was her
Connelly?
name?
I remember
Jennifer
Labyrinth
Connelly.
starring Jennifer Connelly. I chose to place her first, but yes.
I couldn't remember her name, but you're right. And that's the thing, she was the star of the show. David Bowie was definitely the big name, but it was her journey. And he wanted her to end up with him, which if she had would have been really creepy because of the age gap and the fact that she was still a teenager living at home, so clearly under the age of 18. But it's this movie about this girl who's put in this impossible situation of going into another world, not just on a journey, but a completely other world with rules that don't make sense, that aren't even following the laws of physics. And she has to do it because she's been put in charge of a baby, and something went wrong and she has to get that baby back, and she goes after it. And she's kick ass. Like, she befriends people along the way that help her get to where she's going. She fights off enemies. She's smart, she's resourceful. It's really cool. And in the end, David Bowie tries to seduce her. And I think he's got in the movie some sort of like magic spells type of thing going on. And she completely resists and ends up on her own at the very end of the movie. I mean, I'm not saying it's a perfect example, shining example of feminism, but she was a rock
Yeah.
star
Yeah,
in that film.
if these like it's like you got these pockets that of movies and time. So yeah. I kind of want to, you know, Hillary has been talking about doing a podcast about this sort of stuff. And I think that it would be amazing to hear your thoughts on that. And if you wanted to have guests, your guest thoughts on it. But I know you're not you're still
Workshopping it.
workshopping it,
I'm
but
workshopping.
tell the people what your podcast would be.
So I wanted to do a podcast about something like the rose tinted glasses you have when you're a kid and how movies change as you get older and you realize the problematic casting, problematic plot content, you know, racism, all kinds of different stereotypes that are embedded in these movies that we might think of as classics. And so I kind of want to do that. I want to have guests on who have movies that came out when they were kids and kind of rewatching them with a more mature set of eyes, but still kind of figuring out how that would work and the format
And
for that.
the name would be Hillary Shits on Your Favorite Movie.
Hillary kills your childhood.
Okay. Yeah, that one's maybe a bit more marketable. Um, yeah, I honestly love the concept since you've told me about it, and I'm really excited for it, and I hope you are able to do it.
Me too.
Um, so getting back to my boyfriend's back. But that was an important discussion, and I appreciate you bringing it up. Um, so after class, he tries to ask her out, but before he can, Buck appears with the school band and Chuck, who's looking like a goon, and he says, "What are you looking at, dirtbag?" So we realize it was the kid from earlier. He's been fucking with him since they were 6 years old. He's been a shithead since he was six. So then, to get Missy to respect him or like him or love him, he decides to fake a robbery at her job with his best friend Eddie. He hopes that by stopping the robbery, he will impress her and that she will go to prom with him. This is completely just idiotic thinking. I don't even know if this is like teenage boy thinking. It's just really stupid.
Is it stupid though? I mean, let's be honest. If a hot, if a fairly well, you know, groomed woman who you could potentially be sexually attracted to swooped in and saved your life with all the adrenaline and the endorphins flying, you might want to
I'd
go
be
to prom with her.
completely emasculated and I would call her a bitch.
That's your choice. I, on the other hand, would find it I could see him thinking that in all the drama she might be swept off of her feet. I don't think it's out of all let's put it this way, out of all the decisions he makes, and this was colossally stupid, I don't think this was the most stupid decision he
Okay.
made.
So then, of course, something goes wrong with the robbery. During the robbery,
Who
who
could
could have
have
foreseen it?
foreseen that?
A real robber takes, was it Eddie's mask and goes in and holds them up. And he believes that it's his friend Eddie, and at
At
first, right?
first.
So he is like talking back to him, and then all of a sudden he sees Eddie in the background, and he realizes that he's not the robber. And it's just at that time, Missy reaches for a bat, and the robber sees this and goes to shoot her, and Johnny goes in front of the bullet meant for her and takes it in his chest and basically dies. But as he's dying, he asks Missy to the prom, and she very kind of looks around and weirded out by a dying boy asking to the prom is like, sure. I wanted to go back just a bit and say that I think it was really important for us as the viewers, as the audience, to see that he knew that,
That it
that it
was
was
a
a real
real
robber and he still took the bullet for her.
see that's actually part of the endearing part for me is that I think that's I think that's one of the reasons you're supposed to like him is because maybe he runs over his neighbor's roses or something, but when push comes to shove, he just instinctually was protective.
So at the funeral is where I believe we start to see like the bitter, like pitch black, dark humor. We start to see in this movie. It's very akin to like a Beetlejuice. Obviously, Beetlejuice does it way better, in my opinion. But it's starts to come out here. Um, his mother walks up to his casket and said, "Oh no, I'm sorry." His dad walks up to his casket and says, "Goodbye, son. Be nice to God." And then the mom walks up and says, I made you a bologna and mustard sandwich with the edges cut off, just the way you like it. You eat all of it. You hear me? It's really like pretty silly but sweet stuff. At night after the funeral, sorry,
That's the be that's the beginning of
I
the
think
dark
so.
humor.
Yeah, like
You don't think the dark humor was the kind of pseudo sexual assault gym scene earlier in the movie?
sure, we could do that as well. Yeah.
He's like, I'm not
Well,
touching that.
I didn't find it funny. I guess like that scene. So just didn't register to me. You know. But that also feels more like
Okay.
80s 80s college comedy humor, which just isn't very funny to me. But yeah, you're right there. It just didn't register as funny to me, so I didn't clock it.
Can I tell you
Mhm.
something else? I didn't find those things that the mom and dad said as very
Why
funny.
not? You just thought what'd you think of they were? They're just sad?
It just felt, yeah, it just felt, oh, I'm gonna get sad. Oh, I wasn't counting
Oh,
on
why?
getting
Because you're a cry
sad.
boy?
Yeah,
She does that to me.
I can own my emotion. I can own my vulnerability. Some
I'll
people
cry right
can't.
now if you want me to.
But I just thought it was really sad, like, first of all, he's an only child, as far as we can see, right? So not only is their son dying, but they're both no longer parents
Mhm.
in a way. And so people giving like shit advice, like, oh, I'm sure they're better off. in heaven or something like that, or well, at least the suffering is over, or saying other stupid things that they just don't know what to say because the grief is insurmountable. So the dad saying, be nice to God, just felt like, I don't know what to say. I'm just really sad and stuff. And the mom saying, I made you a sandwich. Just like, this is the last thing I can do for my kid is make him a
Mhm.
sandwich. Especially when you think of all those like bullshit asshole pharaohs who got buried with like all of their alive like servants and stuff because they might need them in the afterlife. Like, is it that crazy to think that maybe he might need a sandwich where he's going? You know?
Yeah, I'm sorry. The references are just like I'm all over the place here. I don't know what the fuck to respond to, but I think it was very sweet that you thought that it was like sweet and sad and bittersweet, really, a moment between the parents. I can see that as well.
I honestly felt like the dark, and I know you're gonna get to it, but I think the dark humor starts in the next set of scenes.
Okay,
For me
well, let me
anyways.
know. I might have missed it as well. So at night after the funeral, Johnny rises from the grave and he is greeted by Murray, the gravedigger, who warns him that he can't leave the cemetery. Johnny ignores him and goes back to his home. And at this point, I really thought that Murray was going to come back in a bigger way. And we do see him a little bit at the end, but not as much. I thought he was going to be like an advisor, somebody who would go back, he'd go back to and be like, "Hey, what's going on with me? My changing body and stuff like that," which is a theme in this movie about teenagers and their bodies changing. That is David Bowie. Is that David Bowie? Yeah. Okay. Cool. 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 Sick tape dope. Another background change for Hillary for the Patreon members. She's giving the Patreon members like their money's worth. This episode. But yeah, I think that's a theme there. But I just thought he was going to come back and open bigger. What did you think about Murray's role?
I also thought he was going to be a bigger role, but in a way, it reminds me of what is it that it was it ancient Egypt or was it Greek gods who have the ferryman who takes you across the river Styx
You're
and
just
like kind of
trying to
escorts
make
you.
me sound like somebody who's never read it. Oh, look at these cool horror movies that I like, and you're so smart and you're so intellectual. I'm not gonna stand here and take this shit. I'm not going to. Okay? Go ahead with your
So yeah,
this river Styx analogy or whatever. Go ahead. Yes, you're smarter than I.
it's, which one is it?
I don't want to
Hmm?
talk about it.
I actually don't know either, um, but in a way, it's sort of like that's his only role. First of all, it feels like that is his only role. He's kind of an escort. He's not meant to be a guardian or a mentor. He's just supposed to get you from point A to point B, and then it's your job to do the rest. And also, this feels a lot like a typical guy movie. This kid comes back from death. He crawls out of his own grave holding a rose. He has almost zero familiarity with this kind of situation. And he has to go back now and tell all of his friends and family that he's still alive. And he has to get home from the cemetery. Like, I don't know about you, but like when we buried my grandfather, the cemetery was an hour's drive away from his house. Like, this is presumably a smaller town. But like he couldn't have asked the dude for a walk for a ride, but of course not, because he's a dude. Dudes don't even want to ask for directions. This man has this cursory knowledge of other people that have come back from the grave. He doesn't listen to him, completely ignores him, and then just sets off on foot to find his parents to blow their minds with this revelation that he's back from the dead and refuses to ask for any help. It's like, of course you did. Of course you fucking did.
Guys are the worst. Am I right? But
They're just socially conditioned to be difficult.
Murray does say that the last time something like this happened was about 15 years ago, which we'll come back into the story a little later on. So that night, Johnny goes back to his house, and his parents are kind of surprised that he's back, but more like I take it as shocked or just nonplussed. It's just a different. This feels like a John Waters film or something like that. And I know you're not too familiar with John Waters films, but just this like blasé attitude that they have of their son being back. They're like, oh, okay, cool. So, but yeah, so there's a
But that was
go.
kind of,
Oh, okay.
go ahead. So for me, the maybe a little bit at the cemetery, but definitely with the parents was the start of the
Mm.
dark humor. He comes back to life and people are like surprised. Like if somebody who hasn't been in town comes back into town and is a mildly big deal. Oh, I didn't expect to see you here. Not, oh my God, you're a medical miracle. And I kind of expected it from the cemetery guy. Like I wasn't like it was kind of funny when the cemetery guy does it, but you're like, okay, he works in a cemetery, the groundskeeper or
Yeah,
owner or
what is
whatever.
his role? Is
Then
he
his
an actual human being? Like what? Because other people see him and talk to him, so he's alive, but he works with the dead, sort of thing. That's kind of a cool little role they got going for him.
just like the ferryman
With
over
with,
the
with
river
the
Styx.
group with the rock and roll group Sticks. Yeah,
Yes. Yep.
sail away with me, something like that. Go on.
Sex joke,
That
sex
wasn't a
joke.
sex joke.
Okay. No, no, no. I'm just saying or insert some standard
Oh, like
guy.
boner pills or something. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow, you thought of a
Yeah.
reference immediately. Um, yeah, but I know you're gonna get to this, but I thought that okay, the groundskeeper of the cemetery, he's the closest to the dead that anybody in town is. So maybe he's not surprised. And then the parents not really being too surprised. I'm like, okay, well, they're in a state of shock and they're willing to believe anything. But then it just
Yeah.
keeps
Keeps happening. Right,
happening.
right, right. So, and I noticed that his mom has the single white female haircut, which is the bob, the
Yes.
crazy. I think they call it the fuck ass bob. That's what all the TikTok kids are calling it nowadays. And they say, we thought you were dead. And then he's like, well, I got better. So he goes up to his room and he's looking in the mirror and he looks a little pale. He sees the bullet wound in his chest. Goes to sleep. In the morning, he comes downstairs and they're acting like nothing has changed. His mom made breakfast for him. His dad's like reading the paper. The dog's still there. And his like he looks pale, so she wants him to go see the doctor, um, Dr. Bronson. Um, and they call Dr. Bronson, and she's like, our son Johnny died recently, and I was wondering if you could look at him. It's like pretty good. So he goes to school. At school, he shows up late. Yeah.
Wait a second. Were you not expecting that to be a bigger joke? I was expecting them to make a thing of it that they call okay, these grieving parents call a doctor to say, our son died, but he got better and we now think he might be a little sick. And then Johnny leaves before she can put him on the phone. So there's no way to make her sound less crazy. I thought they
Oh
were going to
yeah,
make like a thing about
yeah.
that.
Because at this point, nobody knows that he's back. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah. I take it as just like this is it helps to make the you're unsure of what kind of world you're in because they're just not acting like you normally would if somebody were to come back to life, you know. So I think it does a pretty good job
Yeah.
that way. So at school he shows up late and his teacher's like she calls his name, he's not there, and she's like, "Oh, that's right." But then he shows up late and she says, "Just because you're dead does not mean that you can come waltzing in here whenever you like." Which is a great line. His friend Eddie sees him and is like, "What the fuck's happening?" And like Missy sees him and kind of blows him off because she's like weirded out, right? I mean,
I love her
right.
reaction.
Well, do you want to talk more about it?
Well, I know you're going to get into it in a little bit, but first of all, the teacher's reaction was great. She's like, "Oh, he's dead." And she looks kind of like abashed, like she said this kid's name and his friends are in that same class. And then he comes waltzing in and she immediately changes her tune. And that's when I knew that this was going to be a completely different kind of movie because I understood why the groundskeeper of the cemetery and his parents might have not exhibited a lot of shock that he was back from the dead. But the teacher just switching on a dime and being like, well, if you're alive and if you're alive enough to get to school, then you should be on time. It's like, okay. Okay, so we're just not going to be shocked about
Yeah.
this. We're just not. And I loved how they did that because they put it in there to make it very obvious that the teacher knew he was dead. She calls his name, he's not there. She has the moment of realization that he's dead. So you know that she knows. It's not that she calls his name and he answers and she just didn't get the
Right.
news. She knows he's dead and she doesn't give a fuck. Like she does
Yeah,
not
because this
care
is
at
a
all.
small community and that's a pretty big way to die for a teenager. So it would have gone around and this was after the funeral. So yeah, she definitely knows he's dead. So then at lunch, Johnny try they're like talking with Eddie. He's looking at
Wait, did we talk about Missy not wanting to go to prom with him? Didn't that happen
no,
immediately
not
after
yet. No.
class?
Yeah,
Oh,
just
never mind.
Missy just
Okay.
blows him off. She says she has gym and then she goes off and she goes to lunch.
Mackenzie.
So at lunch, Johnny tries to bite Eddie's arm, and he's like, just a little bite, but it is like, no, you shouldn't be biting it at all. And so Eddie runs off. Later, Johnny asks Missy what time to pick her up from prom. And this is where she's like, I don't know. Now I'm not going with you, whatever. Or, he's getting the feeling that she doesn't want to go with him. So he's like, you're not canceling our date, are you? I came back from the dead for this thing. And she says, well, Johnny, I didn't expect you to make it. And he says, well, I wouldn't have asked if I couldn't make it. So that's two things, right? So she didn't expect him to make it as far as living. So it's like not a double entendre, but it's two meanings, right? Make it as far as like make the date, but also make it as far as alive because you were dying at the time, you
Okay.
know? Um, and then she's like, well, I have a boyfriend. And she says, okay, forget the prom. Let's just go to the movies. So I'm still talking about her reaction, but at this point, did you want to talk about her reaction? I still have a little bit, couple more sentences.
I love that her initial reaction is, I said no to you. I said yes to you because I thought you were dying, and I am not required to keep that promise because those were extenuating circumstances. And then when he pushes back, which, as you get older and wiser, you realize that somebody who's actually sweet and kind is going to respect your boundary. If you say, I don't want to go to this thing anymore, you are always able to change your mind and say, she could have not known he was dying, said yes, and then said, you know what? I have a boyfriend. I didn't think it was gonna, I was thinking we were broken up, but now we're back together for sure. And the answer is no. And a really nice guy would have just respected that, but he doesn't respect her boundaries at all. And she holds firm. She's like, nope, sorry. I said yes. It was a weird circumstance. I've got a boyfriend. So the answer is actually
Mhm.
no.
Yeah, no means no, Johnny.
Like, come on, Johnny.
But Missy is kind of hesitant to be around him, but she does change her mind when her boyfriend Buck and Chuck kind of they show up and they discriminate against Johnny for being a zombie. They're like, "Oh, what are you doing here amongst the living? It's like you dirty zombie," and that sort of thing. And this was, I guess, their way to talk about racism. But however, it doesn't come off that good because Johnny is white. I think maybe if the character of Johnny were black or something like that, maybe I don't know. It didn't hit. It didn't because this comes on later, like when there's a mob of people and there's with pitchforks and stuff like that, they start calling her a whore for being around this undead person or whatever. But I don't know, it just didn't hit the way that I think that they wanted it to hit for me anyway.
Well, first of all, I thought it was more about being an outcast than necessarily being an not necessarily a racial act. Also, interestingly enough, the American Disabilities Act was passed in 1990, which I definitely knew and did not just quickly
Hmm.
Google. So it could also have been more of like a disabilities type of thing. Like you're othered because you're not as good as us. You don't have the same capabilities as we do. So there's lots of different ways to be outcast. And I guess I kind of thought it could have been more along just general otherness instead of
So
specifically
this is a hate
racism.
crime, is what you're telling me.
I think it's hateful.
Yes.
I don't see a crime being
Yes.
committed, but maybe you might know more of that. I think you've spent more time with officers of the law than I have, just in generally sociable circumstances.
Female strippers is what they're called.
Oh, I was. Is that where they got the
Yes.
handcuffs from?
So, um, are you you should probably change your background and then I can keep moving. The comic transition is cool. And on the marquee is the original name of the movie, Johnny Zombie. I really like the name Johnny Zombie. I wish they would have gone with that instead. Instead, they went with My Boyfriend's Back, which they don't even play the
Yeah.
song in the movie. They do play it in a trailer of the movie, but not in the actual movie, which I think it was they probably couldn't afford this. But this was a Disney movie. This I'm not sure if it's on Disney Plus or whatever, but this was a Disney movie, which could explain why later on some of Philip Seymour Hoffman's lines were ad-libbed or not ad-libbed, sorry, um, re-recorded or dubbed
Re-recorded
over,
or
to make it sound like Mother Fluffer, that sort of thing, right? And we'll get to that. But so they're on a
okay.
date and it's going pretty well. In the background of the movie or in the theater, the movie they're seeing is sorry. The zombie scenes in the film that is playing when Johnny and Missy are on a date in the theater were taken from the made-for-TV film The Midnight Hour, which you and I saw. You probably don't remember. We saw it about 3 or 4 years ago, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a fun movie. This is where we see Matthew McConaughey and his two lines. Like somebody says, "Isn't that Buck's girl?" And he says, "Yeah." And then they're like, "Oh, what's going on here? I don't know," that sort of thing. And that's the extent of the Matthew McConaughey that we see.
It was, I think that was his character for a number of years, being like, oh yeah, like whatever, was just not, he didn't have a lot of like depth to a lot of his
Yeah.
characters. So,
So after the movie, they're in the car just talking, and Missy's like kind of hugging up on him, kissing his neck, sort of stuff like that. And she accidentally, I think she was like sucking his ear or kissing his ear, something like that. And it's falls off. Actually, I thought in her mouth, which is
mhm.
pretty nasty. Is that America Ferrera?
It is. America Ferrera is my girl crush. If she asked me to be her girlfriend, we are going to be going steady immediately.
That tracks. She looks really skinny there, but remembering her from Ugly Betty. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So Johnny goes to you keep messing me with these messing up words. Johnny goes to the town doctor, Dr. Bronson, who's running tests on him. Wait, first of all, let's go back. She sucks Johnny's ear off. And I said, like, that's nasty. What do you think? What are you thinking? Like, who's as a girl who's probably been in that situation in a car making out with a dude after the movies and his ear falls off.
Yeah, that happens to me
I'm sure
so
it does.
often. It's weird.
You-
Imagine, but ears are more fragile than, especially male ears, because they're not used very frequently.
oh,
Like
what
you
are you do?
can,
You doing
like the
a
guys.
tight five? You're practicing for your stand-up show? Is that what's going on? Because that's a good one.
Oh, I always love a fan. Thank you.
I'm a stan.
Um,
I am obsessed.
so, oh gosh. were we ever going to talk about why she changes her mind to go on this ridiculous date with him in the first
Well,
place?
we could definitely talk about it. What I took it as was that because Buck and Chuck were being such assholes, she was like, "Well, fuck you. I like him. He's cool," and went on a date with him. But what did you take it as?
I mean, to me, it either seemed like she was pity dating him, which makes sense because she pity said yes to going to prom with
Mhm.
him, or she was mad at Chuck still. Maybe
Buck.
didn't hunt or whoever, Buck, didn't buy his. Wait, is it Chuck
Yes,
and
it
Buck?
is Chuck and Buck.
Oh my
Which
God, a dynamic duo of
which we
Chuck and
could
Buck.
talk about, like, we just had that queer film theory where they were talking about some characters who were like, oh, what was it? Y tu mamá también, right? Where there's two dudes who are really close friends, but they were actually like really into each other. I think that's what's going on here with Chuck and Buck.
Chuck definitely. I think Chuck definitely has a man crush on Buck.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Anyways, but like why does she like him? And then you see him, his ear is falling off. Just say, "Hey, it's been a wonderful date. I kind of want to never see you again." Because it's clear that you have huge issues. Like a body part of yours fell off and you didn't even notice. So that to me says that you're not in a space to be dating right now, probably requiring significant medical attention. Instead, she goes into the super caretaking role of being like, "Oh, here's your ear. I'm sorry. Are you okay?" Like, what about her? She just sucked some dude's ear off. That is kind of traumatic. Like, if something like that happened to me, like, why isn't he also sort of taking care of me in this situation? Like, hey, I'm really sorry. That was really awkward. But it's all like him and his like weird physical issues. Again, it's like, this is again why I kind of got like a disability theme from him more because it's like his body isn't functioning correctly. He can't do all the same things that he used to do. He's sort of falling apart, actually falling apart. And it's causing people to see him as an outsider and think he's sort of weird. And this girl is now into him. I'm guessing because she just pities him.
Mhm. I'm going to be super surprised when we get your rating of the movie. So then Johnny goes to the town doctor, Dr. Bronson, who runs tests on him. Well, that is unlike any other man who seeks medical attention, but I guess just like a typical man seeks attention when it's almost too late, when he's literally body parts are falling off
Dying.
of him. So he says, okay, so after he runs his test, he's like, okay, well, you're dead, which is unusual because we don't usually see this much activity from a dead person. And then he shows him, so Johnny shows him his ear, and the doctor fucking just talks into it, like making a joke. I'd be so pissed. I'm like, this is not the time for jokes, doctor. And then he asks if he can keep it. He says no, but then Johnny rips some skin off of his arm.
Oh God, that was so gross, especially since you know it's not going to
Right,
regenerate.
yeah. The doctor then offers him some super glue for his ear. At this point is when he refers him to a woman named Maggie, the widow of a zombie that this had happened 15 years earlier, the same thing.
Yeah.
So he goes to see her. Well, first of all, let me
Yep.
pause real quick. Anything you wanted to talk about at the doctor's office?
I honestly, I like the ears talking into
Yeah,
the
that's
ear
pretty funny.
scene. I think I first of all, I like it as a funny, but also if my body was falling apart, I kind of want a doctor who's going to make a silly joke and lighten the mood because I'd be stressed. I'd be stressed out. Especially like didn't he go to the doctor because he had some dream that every part of his body was like falling
Coming
off?
up next, or
Oh, is
hasn't
that
happened yet. I don't know
next?
if it's next, but it hasn't happened yet. Yeah.
Oh gosh, I'm out of order, but anyways, like he's this horrible thing happened to him. He already has these feelings of inadequacy, right? He had that whole nightmare about having sex and having a dick that was too small. And now some girl was sucking on his ear and it came off in her mouth. Like, I'd like a doctor with a little bit of brevity in that scenario, probably. So I actually kind of appreciated
I
that.
would cry. I mean, sir, give him back my ear. So, Maggie, the widow of the zombie, tells Johnny that he needs to eat the flesh of the living to stop decaying. And Johnny is disgusted by the thought of it, remembering that his friend was very cross at him for trying to bite his arm. She says a small bite will give you 20 minutes of life. In the meantime, Dr. Brunson is trying to create a serum to reverse the decaying. Uh,
Hmm.
so Johnny leaves and says I'm not going to do that. That's unthinkable, the worst thing that a human can do, as he says in the intro. So he leaves. Then we're back at Johnny's house. He's in his pajamas, getting ready for sleep. Missy, who is in her nightie, goes to see Johnny at his house. So she climbs the up to the window in her nightie, and she like is stroking his hair, and some of his hair falls out. Do you remember what happens next?
No, I
He
don't.
sneezes and his nose falls off. And
Okay.
she puts it back on with the gum
Yep.
that she definitely was not chewing before that moment. Um, she goes to leave. It's exactly the reaction that you were saying you would have had. Or it was like, okay, something's wrong with you. I'm gonna be leaving now. She's like, goes up to leave. She gets up to leave, but he grabs her arm and she's like, let go. But when she yanks it, his arm gets taken off with her. Then he stands up and his leg falls off. Then his dick falls off. And he wakes up and it's his nightmare. So,
Okay. There's a lot of dream nightmare
yeah.
stuff in this.
Yeah. Um, it's got to be something about one of your worst nightmares being your dick falling off. Your manhood, huh? Men and their manhood?
Mm.
Problematic.
Do you remember that one part in Aaron Brockovich? Did you watch that
I
movie?
watch that movie incessantly with you.
Did we? Because I only remember watching it once in theaters
You're
with
a
my
liar.
parents. Is it possible that you watched it with a different girlfriend?
Um, I plead the fifth, but we definitely saw it. But anyway, go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay. So there's this one scene, right? Obviously, the thing of Aaron Brockovich, right, is that there's a town and there's a water waste or whatever company that's been putting toxic chemicals in the ground, and everybody has some type of they're getting cancer. So there's this one scene where this woman is getting like a hysterectomy and she's already had breast cancer, and but she has so many different types of cancer, and she looks at Aaron, who's her lawyer, and says, if I don't have breasts and I don't have a uterus, do you think that I can still call myself a woman? And she tries to smile and she starts to cry. Obviously, a much more poignant scene than the dream sequence from My Boyfriend's Back, but I do think that that fear of like, where is the line where I'm no longer really human anymore? And some of the basic defining characteristics of who I am are just like, it doesn't even, like, I'm not even a person
Hmm.
any longer. Like, I've been dehumanized to such an extent.
That's a great point. Um, yeah, I way beyond I hadn't even thought about that. But also, you only see it once, and you remember that line. That's pretty good.
It was arguably the saddest part of the whole movie.
Is it sadder than the end of Big Fish?
Yes, because he was an old
Don't
man,
start. Okay.
but he had had a big life.
Big Fish is not allowed to be played in our house unless
Unless I need
Hillary
a
needs a
good
good cry
cry.
because it is a very sad ending.
Not the whole movie, just
Just the
the
end of the
end
movie,
of the
yeah,
movie.
yeah. That one and Gerard.
Yes, I
Yes, I love
P.S. I
Gerard
love
Butler.
you.
Yeah, that one as well. And The Notebook. Just the
Just the
ending. There's
ending.
a couple. Yeah.
Hmm.
So Excuse me. By the way, Mindy Kaling, very nice. I like the picture.
Yeah, I got one of her pictures before she became extremely skinny because I no longer like how she looks. But back then, she had some cushion for the pushing, man.
That tracks. So back at school, he's in the library. He's trying to figure out, what to do about like how he can survive. And he's sitting next to this girl, and he gets closer to her and almost bites her because he's so hungry. But then later, Johnny and Missy meet up at the library where he is attacked by Buck and Chuck. And Chuck chases him with a bat into the hallway where then he grabs an axe. And I thought, like, this dude is unhinged. And he's like, this is where he keeps yelling, "Come here, you Yahoo toucher." This is the part that was like dubbed over. And I was like, I don't know what he's actually saying. Like, you Yahoo toucher? What does that even mean? Like,
Dick toucher? Dick.
but in the context, he's saying that he was touching Missy's. I don't know. It's very weird. It just doesn't make any sense. And I don't know. I wish I knew what they
Probably
were.
Chuck being afraid of his own sexuality.
Sure, sure.
That's
Yeah.
probably it,
So then
right?
Chuck accidentally hits himself in the head with an axe and dies. And he falls to the floor. Johnny goes to his knees and takes a bite out of Chuck's stomach. Missy and Eddie walk in on him doing it. Actually, Eddie walks first, and Eddie is like grossed out. He's like, "Oh, come on, man! Colleges look at this sort of thing." Great line.
I love that
And
line.
then Missy walks up and she says, "You ate Chuck." And Johnny says, "Not all of him."
Not all of
Yeah, I
him.
think just
Not
the
all of
humor
him.
is pretty spot on in this movie. Most of the humor,
Do you think they intentionally called him Chuck because of the hamburger reference?
like ground Chuck, and that he is ground Chuck in that.
Yeah, you ate Chuck.
Yeah, I wouldn't give them that credit. So later, Dr. Brunson has Chuck's body, and his dad is there, and he's like, your son he's very sick." And the dad's like, I think his name is Big Chuck. Big Chuck is like, "He's not sick, he's dead." And then doctor says, "Everybody's a doctor all of a sudden." At home, Eddie,
That rings so true, especially after like post-COVID. That rings so true. Everybody thinks they've got they Google a little bit, they think they've got a medical
I think I
license.
could tell whether or not somebody's dead or not. They have it. Oh, he's like, well, he also has an axe in his head at the moment. Uh, at home, Eddie makes Johnny swear not to eat him, which he does. Then Mr. Dingle comes home and just like a normal day, and it says, "Oh, son, by the way, did you by chance murder a kid in school today?" And I think what's his name? Edward Herman, who's from Rory, plays like is just plays it straight and is just such great comedic chops from him. And also from the mom as well, Mary Beth Hurt. But Johnny responds and he says, "It wasn't murder, it was an accident." And then the mom says, "Well, I hope you didn't eat him because I got something from the supermarket." Do you remember what it was?
A
A
body.
kid.
Oh my God, it was a kid. Oh my God, that's right. They stole a kid from the
The mom,
supermarket.
she's a ride or die.
It wasn't just any
Yeah.
human. I love the mom so much. There's more stuff that happens, but she comes across as this like Susie homemaker kind of person in the beginning, making breakfast and, oh honey, I made you a sandwich, whatever. And then she's like, also, if you need meat to survive, I will totally abduct a living child. And not just any child, like that was a cute kid. They didn't pick
Not an
someone who
ugly
you like,
kid.
okay,
Wow.
whatever.
Hillary thinks that
Well,
ugly
I
kids
think
can
that
die.
obviously in horror movies, yes. I mean, that's why they kill off Chuck first, right? Because he's like not a very, you don't sympathize with him.
Are
So
you saying you don't
it's okay if
sympathize
he
with
does.
ugly children? Okay,
Right,
cool.
exactly. They're ugly. So Chuck dies because he's not, and it's always the case, right? In horror movies, it's the sluttiest chick who dies first. It's the guy who's a total dick who die, like who is like starting trouble around the campfire and storms off and is like being a dick. And so he gets killed because he's all alone, whatever. Like it's always the person that you don't like. And that's how they kind of get you into it. So if she had gotten like an older, like a teenager or whatever, or somebody who could have fought back, or somebody who didn't look so cute, you would have been like, okay, that's weird. But because she got a cute kid, you're like, holy fuck. Oh my God. She saw this adorable child and she was like, oh, lunch for my son.
Yeah,
Yes.
it was wild. Like I said, she's a ride or die. But so she takes Johnny to the kid and like shows him, and Johnny is obviously horrified and doesn't want to eat the kid. Suddenly, Chuck and his Big Chuck and his crew arrive to the house. Mr. Dingle answers the door, and Big Chuck says, "I understand that your kid is a zombie." And Mr. Dingle says, "Yes, that's right."
I love that response.
And they want to talk to Johnny. So when they see him, he steps out of the closet. Yeah,
Wait a second. We went past the part where Mr. Dingle is like so nonplussed by his son being a zombie and maybe murdering someone. I mean, his son said no, but that's not really proof. And then eating somebody. And he is so nonplussed by this that when an angry mob comes to the door to talk to his son, he doesn't think it's a dangerous enough situation to slam the door in their face, barricade it, and be like, we have to get you out of here. There's no sense of urgency. He just brings them into his living room and dining room, like, hey, someone for
he
you,
even
Johnny.
says, "Oh, we don't want them to think that we're rude," or something like that. Yeah. So, um, so once he steps out, they end up shooting him in the chest a bunch of times with a shotgun. That doesn't work. They're like, "Come on, man, he's a zombie." And but then he does end up seeing little Chuck. So apparently, the little kid is his remaining son, and this really angers Big Chuck, and he's gonna set Johnny on fire. But then Mrs. Dingle pulls up with the shotty and fires a warning shot to get them the hell out of her house, all while smiling and being pleasant. He says, a Big Chuck says, you're not gonna shoot me. And then she says, I might, or I'll clip your manhood. This makes them all get the fuck out. Love
Yeah,
it. I was not expecting this from her. I was not expecting this
no.
depth or this side of her, but I really love that they did it.
There's a couple of baddie women in this. Obviously not the main chick who, the girlfriend who's basically just there to be the epitome of sexuality. But the older women are 100% badasses, and I do like that.
Mhm.
Um, Also, there is this scene. I'm sorry, I keep thinking of like movie references. There is this one scene. Did you ever see that movie, The General's Daughter?
Travolta? Yeah,
I
a
think
while
so.
ago.
This woman dies in this terrible way, which seems to implicate that she was sexually assaulted before she was murdered. And it happened on a military base, so it was a huge issue. And they have a military guy come in to investigate, who's John Travolta, and he sees this video of her because apparently before she was murdered, she was some sort of like badass like instructor in like torture or counter ops or something like that. And she said the most terrifying thing for a person is not to be killed because then it's over. The most terrifying thing is to do them bodily harm that they will survive and have to live with for the rest of their life. And it feels like that just is a recurring theme of this movie, that the horror is not that you'll die, because that's immediately not an issue. The horror is that you will be mutilated and you will have to somehow live with that forever. Even these guys, she says, I might shoot you. And they're like, whatever. Then she's like, and I might also like make you, a eunuch for the rest of your life. And they're like, oh, then we're going to go. We're not even going to take the chance. We definitely have you outgunned, but we're not taking that chance that you shoot one of our dicks off.
She can shoot one of our dicks off, but she can't shoot them all. Um, I, I think that it goes to show what you're talking about. Like she was going to kill them and they weren't afraid. But she said, I will shoot your dick off. They're like, okay, it's time to go. Um, so later, Johnny goes looking for the gift that he had failed to give Missy all those years ago, and he finds it in a box in his room. Actually, he doesn't go looking for it so much that he knows exactly where it is, which just tells you, you know. So later, Missy is at the hair salon getting her hair ready for the prom, and she's angry after what. Uh, sorry. So then Johnny shows up, and she's like, "Don't talk to me." She's angry after what he did to Chuck, and he's like, "I ate Chuck for you. It's the only way I could live long enough to go to the prom with you. I died for you. I came back from the dead for you." Now, this reminds me of the line that you just brought to my attention within the last week of some, and it's a song that that's on TikTok now that people are like, women are saying it's like so romantic because this guy like crawls out of the, well, do you remember the
Mhm.
line?
It's a oh gosh, I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Okay. I don't
Hosier.
know either, but
And he's like something like, if I die, like don't bury me deep because I'm crawling back to her. Because even in death, I won't be separated from her. I can't remember the exact line. Now I want to
so
look
he's
it up,
Johnny
but
Dingle.
no, let's not compare those
It's
two because
literally the plot
I
to the
really,
movie. But I, I don't know what you think of, what do you think about this? Like he is
oh wait, here it is. I
okay.
found the lyrics. Are you ready? Because it's so romantic, you won't even be
I
able to
already
handle
can't
it.
handle it. Go ahead.
Okay. Um, when my time comes around, lay me gently in the cold, dark earth. No grave can hold my body down. I'll crawl home to her.
What's the title of the song? My Boyfriend's Back?
It's called
Okay.
Work Song
Yeah.
of all things.
But it just made me reminded me of that when I was talking about it. But I wanted to know, what did you think of this? Like it's supposed to be romantic. I came back from the dead for you. Um, I died for you. I kind of lived for you when I was alive. But this is like thrusting this stuff onto her. Like she didn't ask for this sort of thing. I don't know. What did you think of this?
So there were two things that came to mind. First of all, this 100% reminds me of like um this totally reminds me of like all of the like classic. I think as women you get this a lot, and you hear it in in songs and movies. You see it in old time. I remember I used to have a book that was just full of stories of knights at the round table, and this is how romanticism is shown to you, that when a man loves you, he will demonstrate it by doing a feat. It will be a singular occurring feat. So in reality, right, the way that you show that you love someone is not by doing individual feats like slaying a dragon or holding a boombox above your head or crawling out of the grave, right? That's a single one-time thing that you can be motivated to do for a bunch of different reasons, and it's time bound. How you actually show love to someone is usually how you continue to show up for them every day, and that's more tedious and not as romantic, and it's a lot actually harder to do, but that's like actual real love, right? But as women, you get this message of there will be a feat. He will ride off into the sunset, slay the dragon, and bring the head back to me. He will save me from my oppressor. He will do this one single thing that will make him look good and will also show his dedication and love for me. And I was like, what? Because that's just, I mean, I understand why it's like swoon and you love it and it's very romantic, but it's also just it takes a lot of pressure off of men to actually show up for their partners on a consistent basis when they think that they only have to do an occasional romantic gesture to keep a woman in their life. Like this dude is literally falling apart. He is not a good partner for her at this point. And yet he does this thing and he thinks that it gets to absolve him of how incompatible that they really are, you know? So that was kind of boring. The other thing is, I think it was Khalil Gibran, and I read this about love and what love is. And it said one of the things that love is knowledge. So in order to love someone, you have to know who they are. And I remember very strikingly this example that they I believe and I'm quoting from something I read a long time ago, so I'm hoping I'm quoting the right person, but said something like the whole myth of the man falling in love with the beautiful girl that he sees in the cafe is just a myth. You don't know that person. You don't know who they really are. So you are not in love with them. You have an idealized fantasy in your head of who they are and who they will be for you and how they will complete your life. But that's not knowledge of them. You're just creating a fantasy for yourself. And so that could be lust or optimism or hope, but that is not love. And so when I hear him doing all of these feats of love for her, this girl who he barely talks to, who he doesn't know, who he says these creepy things to, I mean, you can't tell me that there was not another opportunity for him to give her this locket in the last 12 years. There was. And he just didn't do it because I'm guessing they're not friends. They're not in each other's lives in a significant way, but he loves her. He doesn't love her. He's lusting after her. And now he's telling her, I'm showing my love to you by doing this big thing. Well, sure, but it's also a little self-serving to get to, to want to come back from the dead. I mean, that kind of benefits both of you to some
Hmm.
degree. And like, if you really loved her, you would do things that work for her. The whole thing was just kind of dumb. But again, when I think of it, I think that is the thing that would have impressed me in high school. Like as a high
Hmm.
school girl, as like a woman who's mature, I think that's stupid. But as a high schooler, I would have been totally swept off my feet. I definitely would have gone to prom with the guy who crawled back from the grave for me.
It's also, first of all that was very eloquent and beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's also, I'm not sure if you mentioned this or if this was going for, but it's very extremely manipulative, right? Like, I did all this for you, therefore you must do this for me. Yeah.
Oh me.
Yeah, you owe me, right? So, he even says other people might like you because you are pretty. I want you, or he might say other people might want you because you're pretty. I want you because I love you. It's like that's very circular logic and it doesn't really make any sense. But he does give her the locket with, so he gives her the present. She opens it up and it's a locket, and inside the locket is their pictures. He then asks her to prom. Yeah, pretty
Creepy.
creepy. He then asks her to the prom, and she says yes, and then they kiss. It's at this point that Big Chuck confronts them and, like, to her says, "Shut up, you zombie slut," and in all kinds of names. And Johnny says, "Leave her alone. She's a good girl." And I was gonna ask, what does that mean, Johnny? What does a good girl mean? So again, that's another kind of fucked up thing to say. Then they call her zombie lover, whore of the undead. But uh, Buck shows up and says it's not her fault. She was taken in by Johnny's zombie ways. So they're about the crowd is kind of gathering to gang up on Johnny, but Missy's father, who's the town sheriff, shows up and tells Johnny to leave town for his own safety. He then escorts Johnny and Missy back to Johnny's house, and his parents invite them in for dinner. So at dinner, Mrs. Dingle tells Johnny to go get some butter from the fridge. He goes to the fridge and opens it up, and he finds a dead body in there. He yells for his mom. She runs and says, "I thought you would like a little snack." He says, "Where'd you get this body?" And she says, "I found it at the morgue. They were practically giving them away." And I love her. I love her for this. I love the whole energy. I love this scene. What did you think?
I I love her too. I love, first of all, that they're staying consistent with how she shows her love, which is through food. Um,
That's true. That's such a good
and
point.
I
I'm sorry
think
to
this
interrupt you, but I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Right back to the, like, even in the first thing that we see her in, where she's like getting him ready for school, and she's like, you haven't eaten anything. Are you sure you aren't going to be hungry? And she's still like really worried about him, Like it's this thing where,
All
you
right, I
know,
give you a little bit of credit. And then is that Brendan Fraser in the background? Underwater,
yes, it
like
is.
rippling muscles. What movie is that even from? That's not even from a movie.
I don't know, but I'm
All
definitely
right,
watching it
awesome.
tonight. It's
Carry on.
so, but yeah, like every scene that she's in with him, she's defending his right to eat, to nourish him in that way. And that's cool. Except for the scenes where she's pulling out a shotgun or whatever and defending him physically. But she's just tough. I
Yeah.
love her.
So they go back to the table, they're talking, and the dog starts dragging. Wasn't sure if it was the same body or a different body, but starts dragging that body around the house, and Mr. Dingle has to go help hide it.
Did we talk about this? There is no way that that dog drags that
You don't think
body.
so? It's like a lab or something.
I don't care. I don't think that their jaw strength is intended to drag something like that across the floor. Dead weight, too. Dead weight supposedly is harder to
Hmm.
carry, I guess. I've heard this I've heard this from very credible sources on Reddit. So, but of course the dog is dragging. Remember that scene from, what was that movie where the guy goes like into like virtual reality or something, and he kills somebody and he thinks it's just a game, but then he
Fucking
comes out
hell.
and he actually
You
killed
know what's
them?
funny is I think that's Brain Scan. It's the name of this Brain Scan. You know what's weird is on IMDb, um, at the bottom of the page it says more like this, and it tells you movies that are like that. And Brain Scan is literally one of those movies, starring Eddie Furlong.
Eddie Furlong. Yes, because the dog is the one that gets him in trouble, right? If you haven't seen it, close your pretty ears. But at the end of the movie, he thinks he's fine and he thinks the whole thing somehow was just a dream. But obviously he did kill the first person he really killed, and the dog has got the foot in his mouth and is like running through the woods or street or whatever, and you just know he's gonna get found out. It's
What a
amazing.
reference. That's that's, that's a
I
pretty
know
sick reference. Did we see that together? I don't even know how you know that movie.
I watched that. I think I was up late at night somehow and managed to watch TV without my parents knowing it, which, given the setup for our house when I was growing up, is pretty impressive. And Brain Scan was on, and I watched it, and it was a terrible movie to watch when you're a kid and your imagination is at a high point and the entire house is dark and silent and you're in the middle of the woods 6 miles outside of the nearest town. It was
Yeah,
creepy.
good movie. I can't wait till somebody chooses that one.
And that image of the dog coming, I remember that image of the dog just put, like, I have a lot of anxiety. So this kid is going through all these trials and tribulations and he's hurting people without really meaning to, and he doesn't know how to stop. And finally everything gets resolved and you're so happy. You're like, oh, thank God Eddie Furlong is fine because he's so cute. And then the dog comes out of the woods with the foot in his mouth and you're like, no,
Do you want to watch Brain Scan
no,
tonight?
no.
All right,
Yeah,
cool,
let's do it.
cool.
Let's do that shit.
So, Mr. Dingle goes to help hide it. So, um, Missy's dad, I forget his name already. Let me see. Mr. McCloud, Sheriff McCloud, says, "Get out of town now, or I will personally kill you." Johnny says no, and then the sheriff punches him and knocks him out, which leads to a fantasy scene, which on the Patreon is my background. It's fantasy scene of like they're at dinner at a restaurant, and he orders the buffet, and he goes back to get the buffet in his big chuck, and he's tied to a chair, and Eddie like tied him there, and he's like, "Take a bite out of him," and like Big Chuck is like talking shit to him. Oh, you can't, you can kill teenagers, but you can't kill a real man, that sort of thing. And Johnny's like, shut up, shut up. But finally, he takes a fight. He takes a bite out of his foot. And Big Chuck's like, ah, not so easy, huh? There's a lot of living in that foot. And then he bites his he bites him again, and he's like, "Yeah, the foot's easy. The calf is all muscle." So he eats that as well. And then he starts eating everything.
Make any
Yeah.
sense?
What was that?
The foot has got to be all gristly and like mostly bone and skin. That sounds like it'd be really hard
Yeah,
to
I've never
eat.
thought about eating a foot. Is that something you think about a lot?
Yeah, like because eventually the apocalypse will
Because that's why you
happen.
keep me around because you got it's a lot of living in this body.
I won't have to start at the foot, that's for sure.
Fuck you. All right. So then shush,
Hey,
you
same
shush.
for
You're
me,
beautiful. Shush.
you know?
So then he ends up eating everything but the head, which is still talking, and the skeleton is picked clean.
That means he ate his dick.
He ate the dick. Yeah. Yeah. He ate that. He ate the butt.
He doesn't talk about
He
it,
ate
but it definitely
ass.
happened.
He ate it all. So he goes to finish him off, but Big Chuck is now transformed
Oh,
into Missy, right? Yeah, Missy. And she's like in this sexy outfit, and he almost
yep.
bites her, but he stops himself at the last second because he didn't realize it was her. But this angers her, and he's like, "Oh, I would never eat you," and that angers her as well. And she's like, well, you wouldn't eat me," and she starts begging him to eat her.
Eat me.
And then
Mm,
he just about does, but he stops and he wakes up. Another fucking dream sequence. Well, this time I guess he got knocked out. But yeah, she's dressed up in, I think it's a
hmm
cheerleader outfit or some shit like that. She has to ask to get fucked or ask to get eaten. That was a little weird. What did you think of that?
hmm I just another straight white male fantasy. The cheerleader with the heavily makeup face and the boobs and the tits on display says, "Eat me, baby, eat me. I know you're too good of a man to do it, but I'm begging you, please eat me." It's like, ugh.
So with Missy, her parents force her. So we're at Missy's house, and her parents are forcing her to go to prom with Buck. But of course, yeah, I don't
Why?
understand.
Why are they doing that, by
I
the
don't
way?
understand it, but he's like very forceful. It's just weird. Um, in some movies, you would have seen like the Buck character going behind Missy's back to the parents and be like, she is acting dangerously with Johnny, and you need to make sure she goes to prom with me, that sort of thing. We just don't see it here. We assume, I don't know.
You
Go ahead.
know, there could even have been a scene where he comes to the door and she's still upstairs and they shake hands and it's like, "Good to see you, Mr. whatever his
McLeod.
name is. Sheriff, good to see you, Sheriff." And then the sheriff's like, "Good to see you, Buck. I'm glad you're here. Distracted my daughter. She's been a real head case lately." Could have been three lines, and they could have established that they have some sort of pre-existing relationship where the dad has already decided that this is a decent guy and the kind of guy his
Yeah.
daughter should be dating. But it would not have been difficult, but they don't do that.
Oh, you dropped out of the picture for a second and it was all Brendan Fraser. And yeah, yeah, it's
Like
pretty
that?
good. Pretty good.
Was
He's
that fun?
staring into my soul. So then Johnny,
We should post these. We should post these to we should put links
this
to
is
these
Patreon
when you
exclusive.
post.
This is just for the
I'm sorry. You're right. I don't know what I was thinking.
but then so of course Johnny doesn't listen to the sheriff's warnings and he goes to see Missy in her room. They're kind of hugging and kissing, but in one of those, he has a flashback to his nightmare or fantasy, whatever, about her asking him to eat her. And so he bites her, but he bites her very lightly on her shoulder, and she's wearing a bathrobe, so it doesn't penetrate the skin or anything like that. But this freaks him out, and he ends up running away, even though she's like, "It's okay, it's okay." Meanwhile,
I hate that. I hate that moment for her. I hate that moment. I hate that moment so much. I hate that he literally tried to bite a bit of her skin off, and her role in this movie is to reassure him. Fuck that. He just tried to actually eat you. And okay, in this movie, if we accept the premise of the movie, as ridiculous as it is, he's a zombie and it's like an urge for him. But it feels like all of these urges to eat people are very intertwined, especially with her, with sexual urges. So, in a way, it again reminds me of guys that you end up having to console for not wanting them, for them feeling insecure or inadequate, or they have a moment and you're like, I guess even though this is really shitty for me, I will tell you that it's fine. And then instead of them saying, hey, that sounds like it was really hard for you, it's like, no, I'm going to make you feel better about this. Even though you did something that made me feel extremely uncomfortable, I'm going to put my discomfort aside because I'm a woman and I will be the caretaker of you and your little fragile ego boy feelings. Like I hate every moment in the movie where she has a right to be angry or hurt or sad or betrayed. And instead, she's portrayed as taking care of whatever fragile male ego is in front of her. Like, screw that. Were there really no women consulting on this film? Like, obviously
She's
not.
completely one-dimensional in that aspect, in most aspects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you that that is, I know while we were watching this, I said, I wonder if this is a dream sequence because it feels like a dream
When she
sequence.
gets bit,
Do you, the whole thing from the time that he gets shot and crawls back from the grave? There's
oh,
so
the
many
whole movie.
instances in this movie where he's, well, everything after he
Uh,
dies.
you thought it was going to be a dream?
I thought it was I think I mentioned it at the time. I'm like, is this a dream? Because there are a ton of dream
Yeah, yeah.
sequences in this where he's imagining things and it feels like just another dream. And it reminds me of that one quote in the movie Inception. Again, if you haven't seen the movie, earmuffs, where he has this woman, his wife, who's showing up in all these places in like basically a dream sequence. And you don't know if she's real and she's in the dream sequence with him or what is going on. And he's like, you're not real. I've I have created you in this dream sequence the best I could, but there is no way I could create all of the three-dimensional beauty that you are. I did the best that I could, but you're a copy and a poor one at best because you are only what I could construct from my memory. And I that movie made me kind of fall in love with Leonardo DiCaprio a little bit because it's so sweet to think that somebody realizes that even their impression of you, they know that it is only a fraction of who you are as a person. And that's what this whole movie feels like is him seeing her in this super one-dimensional way, again, like a dream sequence. Like the whole universe is based on his impression.
Well, it's funny that you're.
His
Sorry, go ahead.
parents his parents aren't upset. A lot of people are on his side that should have been like either repulsed by him because he's a zombie and he's trying to eat people at school, or people that should have just been like really worried about him. But instead, everybody treats him like a normal kid, and he manages to get a girlfriend out of it and still somehow get food magically appearing in front of him that people just like it feels like a
Yeah.
dream. And then all the people act exactly as you would probably hope they would act. This girl who should be repulsed by him takes him under her wing. The friend who you tried to eat shows up for you and is worried about your chances of getting into college. The parents who should force you to go to a doctor are making you bologna sandwiches and killing people and putting them in your
Mhm.
freezer or whatever. You know, like it doesn't feel like anything real.
Something you said kind of reminded me of that Sarah Gailey book, The Echo Wife. Because
Yes.
where you're talking about the quote that you said, where it's like, I couldn't make you exactly how you are, whatever. That's what the issue is happening in The Echo Wife. Yeah. Okay.
I'm nodding my head for those of you
Yeah.
who can't see me. It's so true. And The Echo Wave is an amazing,
hmm
amazing book.
Uh, I
Favorite
like
authors.
Just Like Home a little bit more, but yeah.
Me
Yeah.
too.
So, meanwhile, Dr. Brunson is successfully finds the Fountain of Youth, but is convinced by his female sidekick or nurse person to use
Hmm.
Johnny's skin to make more of the serum so that they can make a shit ton of money instead. So I don't know what that says about, like, the doctor had this good thing he wanted to do, but he's convinced to do evil by a female I believe she was a nurse, right? Or assistant or whatever. So
I do love that she's the evil one. I mean, the doctor is extremely suggestible, and that she's like, "Hey, why don't we just make a ton of money instead of
yeah.
helping this kid?"
So at Missy's house, Eddie tells him that he's come up with an idea of how he can survive, at least through prom. He's like, just eat Buck, but Johnny refuses. And I just wanted to point out that the house that the house that they used for, let me start that over again. The house used for the exterior shots of Missy's house was also used as Nancy's house in A Nightmare on Elm Street. And I've actually seen
Huh.
that house. It is in Pasadena, South Pasadena, because I saw it when I went on the
Right.
tour when I went to California this past September for the Halloween 45th convention, which was awesome. We saw that house, obviously the babysitter house for Halloween, and just a bunch of other stuff. It was really cool. Um, but Dr. Brunson shows up. He pulls up real quick and he picks up Johnny, tells him that he's saving his life and to get in. So he goes back to the lab and he's actually been captured by Dr. Bronson because he's got him tied up in the lab and he's going to attempt to dissect Johnny and create a youth formula from his zombie cells. And he needs about 40 pounds of flesh. And Johnny's like, I don't have 40 pounds.
I don't have 40. Did he say I don't have 40 pounds, or did he say I don't have 40 pounds to
Yeah, 40 pounds to
spare?
spare. And he's like, well, how about 30? It's like, I don't have that. How about you kick in some pounds? So it was pretty funny. But Johnny ends up escaping when
Oh.
Big Chuck leads a mob to kill him, and Missy and Eddie show up to help him. And he flees to the cemetery where Mary is there, and he barely makes it into the cemetery in time. Then his parents and Eddie and Missy show up to defend him against the mob, who literally have torches and stuff like that. Uh,
And again, the groundskeeper escorting him back at the end of his like little life journey.
yeah, the band Sticks, rock and roll band Sticks. Yeah.
Hmm.
Fly Away with Me, I think. I don't know. So then the sheriff gets his gun out and he's like, honey, let the zombie go and I'll buy you a new dress. She's like, no, dad.
What a stupid thing to say. I mean, any girl, any teenage girl who's that pretty knows that you can get a new dress without having to do anything
Right.
really.
This is also just ridiculous that he thinks that she would give up her boyfriend or not boyfriend. I don't who knows what the fuck they are, but give up this person for that she apparently loves for a pretty new dress, you know. So then Ma Dingle,
I'm willing, by the way, I'm willing to let that one go specifically because he's sort of panicking
right.
in the moment.
Yeah. So then Ma Dingle pulls the strap. She pulls out the gun and she's like, she's going to defend her son. Then this is where Murray comes out and asks the sheriff, "Would you have died for her, for for
I don't
Missy?"
like
And it
this.
says, "Would you have come back from the dead and eaten someone for her, like Johnny did?" And he says no. And then he asks the whole crowd, and no, everybody says no. So no one would have. What don't you like about this?
Okay, well, two things.
Two
First of
things. There's two
all,
things. I just want you to know we've been recording for like 3 hours. We've talked longer about
really,
my boyfriend's back than anybody else ever has. But tell me your two things about this.
I can stop. I don't
I
need to
want
tell
to
you
hear your
my
two
two
things.
things. It's no, that's fine. It's clear that my opinions don't
I am
matter
one
as much
sentence away from being from this movie. So please tell me your two things.
as I don't like that he asks. Okay, so I don't like that he asked the dad that question, and the dad's like, "Yeah, you're right. I definitely would not have made the same effort that some little teenage boy with a lustful crush on my daughter would
Right.
have made." And also, I'm not entirely sure. that I disagree with that logic because so I love my parents and I know that they love me, but I recently had a weird conversation with my dad. And I think that for a lot of people, parenthood for like kind of traditional dads doesn't mean the same thing it does, like that you would imagine it does today. And I can kind of see it being correct, that it is true that he wouldn't have done that same thing because a teenage boy is driven by hormones and sex and is has all of this external motivation. And the dad, knowing how dads were, probably not. Honestly, honestly, it feels like that was the correct
Hmm.
answer.
Yeah.
I hate it, but I think it's the correct
I
answer.
don't know who that is.
It's Tom Holland and his masterful performance of Umbrella in the Lip Sync
Okay.
Battle.
Okay. I thought that was Kate Beckinsale. Kate Beckinsale, that's a person, right? Kate Beckinsale?
Tom Holland is dressed up as Rihanna,
Right. No, I got you.
so
No,
it's
no, no,
not a
no, no. I
lady,
know, but
but he
he's
is
very
very
pretty.
pretty. So I can
Yes.
understand why you got
So
confused.
this earns him the respect and the acceptance of the town and the sheriff. And so they all leave. Johnny and Missy end up going to the dance, but Johnny is quickly dying. She has to help him out of the car. And then Johnny begins to decay. And then halfway through their dance or whatever, he falls down to the floor of the gym, the half court, and dies. Or his last words before he dies are, I love you. And she puts the locket around his neck as he passes away, and there's fog everywhere. Honestly,
You can't see it, but I'm hard eye rolling
okay,
right now.
what I was just about to say was regardless of how problematic everything is here, it was a bit touching. Like, you know, just the whole situation where, you know, regardless of how right or wrong he was, how obsessed he was, how problematic, how creepy he was, he just wanted to live long enough to get to the dance and have a dance with her. And they have that dance or half a dance or whatever, and he ends up passing away. What was the eye roll for?
He goes to the dance probably knowing that he's going to die. And instead of, as one would when one loves somebody, putting her first, he says, yes, go to the dance with me, where I might very well die in front of your eyes. And I might die right in front of your face. Like what a traumatic thing to put
For the
someone
second
through,
time.
and not even someone, and yeah, and not even, I mean, my God, and not even, and here's the thing. I assume that when people are confronting their death, I've never been in a life or death situation, but I assume that when people are confronting their death, that they will put themselves first because it makes sense. They're facing something extremely challenging to face and they're trying their very best. And so fine, he's having his selfish moment. I hate that there is no recognition of how hard this is for her. I mean, I understand it's a high school teenage movie, but there is so much time and energy that we spend on his point of view. And there is nothing about the fact that she watched this kid die in front of her eyes, then had him come back to life, then was guilted into going out on dates with him, then had body parts of his fall off in front of her, then watched him die again. And the whole time, she doesn't know him. She doesn't actually really know him. And she's just doing all of these selfless things for him because he was so obsessed with her that he, without consulting her, asking her if it's what she wanted, did stuff that primarily benefited him.
Mhm.
It's like, I understand that it's touching. If they, I feel like there's a lot of movies like this where there's a lot of emphasis put on the man's journey. And it's like, what about her? I don't see any her in this.
What about her? The name of your
I'm bummed.
podcast.
There we go.
I really like your point of view on these. Uh, issues and topics and scenes and stuff like that. And just wanted to say once again that I think you would make a great podcast. So, in heaven, he's told by the gatekeeper that he was not meant to die in the robbery, and he is sent back to the moment before the robber enters the store. The event replays, and Johnny expresses his love for her. Uh, and then she realizes that he wasn't actually shot. He survives this time due to the bullet hitting Missy's locket. And she says, "You sacrificed your life for me." He says, "You would have done the same for me. Trust me, I know." Johnny and Missy go to the prom as a couple, and that's the end of the movie. But for me, it's like it's a bit. Then it's kind of like a time travel movie a little bit. First of all, but also
Mhm.
she's not the same person. She didn't go through the same experiences. So at the end of the first timeline, she may, right or wrong, being manipulated or not, I think she thought that she loved him, right? Based on the experiences that they went through. Here, she doesn't, she loves him because he, saved her life, but like, I don't know, it didn't hit for me. Well, I don't know what you thought. What did you think? She's basically, I'm sorry, she's basically
So,
there. This was always like she was always going to fall in love with him.
yeah. I mean, first of all, again, it's bullshit, but it also feels like a high school girl thing to do. I do think there's a big difference between the first scenario where he gets shot and he dies, where you feel pity for him because he's dying, and the second time where he gets shot and he miraculously survives, which frames him more as a hero rather than a victim. So I can see her feeling all the things that he initially wanted her to feel when he came up with this cockamamie scheme about making a robbery pretending a robbery
Yeah.
was happening. The endorphins, the adrenaline, he's a hero. He tried to save me. Also, I almost feel like there was an underlying assumption and maybe even a cut scene where when Buck, because Buck apologizes at the beginning of the movie, Buck apologizes and he gets back in Missy's good graces by bringing in the high school band or whatever. And he's like, I didn't stand you up intentionally. My car broke down and I had to walk 8 miles. And then by the time I could get to a payphone, you were gone. I assumed that there was some sort of storyline where Buck was screwing somebody else, and Missy eventually kind of finds out or suspects it
Hmm.
strongly. And so didn't really feel comfortable with Buck in the first place. And then this guy comes in who's always kind of been in the background, but now she sees him in this new, like, heroic, like, hero, superhero sort of way. And it's just time to ditch
Hmm.
Buck.
Well, yeah, I guess because they were at that
Um,
point broken up still, or had they made up? They did
no,
make
they
up.
got
Yeah,
back
yeah, yeah. But
together.
still, tentative.
They did make up, but his excuse was really
Yeah, yeah,
shitty.
yeah.
So it
Mhm.
sounded dumb.
So that's the end of the movie. The last thing I wanted to say,
Oh, I know we're way over. There's more.
the last thing I wanted to say, one second, was that this was actually shot in the Hill Country region of Central Texas, which encompasses locations such as Austin, where we live, Georgetown, um, Round Rock. The 8-week shoot used a budget of less than $10 million. And then shortly before its theatrical release, it was retitled to My Boyfriend's Back, contributing to a trend of movies adopting titles from popular songs. So, what else did you want to say?
The one thing that we kind of skipped over a little bit is that after Johnny dies at the prom or decomposes at the
Mhm.
prom or whatever and goes back to heaven and they say, oh, this was a mistake. They say, this was a mistake. And the whole purpose was to see like what you were going to do when you were given a second chance. And and then that would decide if you went up or down. Like there was, depending on how you acted when you were given a second chance, that would decide if we were going to correct the mistake or not correct the mistake and let you die. And your actions have proven that you deserve a second chance. And I'm thinking to myself, what? What actions? Endlessly pursuing this girl who is like I was so annoyed. I was kind of annoyed by that. I I just I didn't like it. It's like, what did he do that was selfless or kind or generous or giving that showed he deserved a second chance? Like aside, it sort of like reminds me of those people that say that they're nice guys just because they don't go around beating people up. Like there's this very low minimum standard where if you don't do anything totally shitty, that you're a good person. What did like I just didn't see anything that he did that was like, oh, this is a good guy that deserves a
I think
second chance.
there it's going back again to the feats of strength or whatever. I forget how you named it, like how men show their love or something like that by doing things. I think it's, and I'm not agreeing with it. I'm just saying I think what they're saying is that he sacrificed his life for her again. Like he knew what happened the first time. This time he was given a
Hmm.
second chance, right? No, no, I think I'm getting it mixed up. He was sent back. You're right. You're right. I'm sorry. He sacrificed himself again after he'd already gone to heaven.
I guess he technically didn't try to eat any more people, which is probably a
Yeah.
good thing. He only he only ate Chuck, who was already dead, who killed
Yeah.
himself, basically. Is that the thing that was so amazing that they gave him a second chance? I don't
So
know.
that's the end of my boyfriend's back. So, um, we do rate things here. First of all, before we rate it, the whole movie, what did you think of it?
I I think it's a study in toxic masculinity and chauvinism at its 1990s best.
Yeah,
I think it's funny and it's got some weird romanticism in it and it's hugely problematic.
I can agree to that. I thought that it used the trappings of horror pretty well. The zombie and eating stuff, and there wasn't really, oh, there's a little bit of blood, but sorry, my allergies are messing with me. Yeah, there was a little bit of blood, but not much. So I liked what it encased itself in, like horror. But as far as the actual story itself, I think is hugely problematic. Didn't represent women very well. Well, didn't represent the main woman very well. I think the mom was kind of dope. And the
Hmm.
Cloris Leachman character, Maggie the zombie expert, that's her literal name, her credit in the
Hmm.
movie. I thought she was really cool. But other than that, yeah, I don't think it represented women really well. And it just showed them as there for men to ogle at and like and chase and like pursue and not listen to when they say no, whatever, stuff like that. So yeah, there's some pretty problematic stuff there. But that leads us into our ratings. Let's go ahead and rate the film. We do rate it out of 5 upside down crosses. So for you, what would you rate My Boyfriend's Back from 1993?
I would rate it as a 2, and I would say that the reason it gets 2 crosses instead of actually 0 crosses, which I was very tempted to rate it, is because um all of the supporting
Mm-hmm.
cast. I did not feel I was not at all rooting for the boyfriend, the girl, the main characters are, I mean, may as well not have existed. But the mom, God, what a baddie. His dad had this dry humor that was amazing. The zombie expert, like you mentioned, was cool too. Even that female doctor's assistant or whatever medical assistant was, I loved that she was the evil one and like stirring the pot and causing trouble. Um, there were a lot of amazing sideline characters, but if you can just watch the movie for that, it's that it would be the reason to watch it. In terms of the main plot, it's a 0 for me. But overall, I'm giving it a 2.
Okay. So for me, I've said this before on the podcast, like 2.5. I think we just had different ratings. I think we feel very similar to it, just different ratings. 2.5 for me is an absolute terrible film, and then it just gets worse from there. I don't think this is a terrible film. I think it's pretty problematic, but I like the humor a lot and I like some of the characters a lot. So I'm gonna have to give it 4.5. I'm just kidding. I'm gonna give it uh 2.5
Wow.
upside down crosses for me. It's just a bit charming. Not the character. I don't think Andrew Lowry is really charming as Johnny, but everything else, like you're saying, surrounding him, the other characters and the how they use horror to tell their story and all that sort of stuff. I have a weak spot for it. So I would give it 2.5 upside down crosses. What we do now here is we give a movie in a similar vein to My Boyfriend's Back, something that you think would be a excellent pairing, like a double bill. So for you, what would be a similar movie or a better movie probably that would be a double bill?
I mean, and we've already referenced it. The favorite movie that I've seen so far this year is Lisa Frankenstein. I love that movie. It's very similar romantic movie where the girl is in charge and driving the plot. And also, and you realize this rather early on, for whatever reason, the guy's unable to talk for most of the movie. So she has almost, it's amazing because the entire movie is through her eyes and she's allowed to make stupid choices and dumb choices, just like really just to be kind of a bad person and still look redeemable. And to me, that is the ultimate test, is when a woman can make a bad choice in a movie and you still feel you're still rooting for her. And I love that about Lisa Frankenstein, and I think absolutely it just came out. I think you'd have to like rent it on, Google Play or Fandango or something like that, but absolutely worth a
Yeah, I agree. I
watch.
really, really enjoyed Lisa Frankenstein. For me, I thought I muted it and I did not mute it. I'm sorry. For Patreon who's going to hear that. I am so sorry. Um, for me, I'm going to do Return of the Living Dead 3. Uh, this is a rom-com, not so much comedy, but a little bit of it there. It's about a remarkable it's an underrated sequel, and it follows the tragic and heartbreaking story of Kurt and Julie, whose worlds are torn apart after Julie becomes a zombie during a tragic accident. With Kurt desperately searching for any way to save his lover from her monstrous fate, Return of the Living Dead 3 examines themes of obsession, devotion, and the line between humanity and monstrosity. This is one that I saw a couple years back, and I was kind of blown away by what it was. So yeah, I would recommend. I'm not necessarily saying it's also from the 90s, so it's not like the best representation of women or anything like that, but I do think it's an interesting look at that. So yeah, I would say Return of the Living Dead 3, I should say. So, Hilary, I wanted to say thank you so much. You basically gave a master class on film analysis and ran me in circles, and I appreciate that. Everybody can see why you are my better half. Typically, what we do is give people like where they can follow you. I don't know if you necessarily want, like you're not much on social media, so wanted to give you that opportunity if that's something you wanted to do.
I mean, I think the best way to, first of all, no, I'm not on social media. I kind of hate social media, but if people want to react on your Twitter, on your Instagram, and give me a little shout out and say hello, say hello. I'm not really big. I'm mostly on Instagram if I'm on any social media platform, but even that, not so
Okay.
much. So
That's fair. Yeah, I'm not on Twitter. I don't post on Twitter anymore. I still have the account, but I have deactivated or whatever. It's only Instagram really that I update. So follow if you like to follow me, you can follow the show at My Horror Confessional on Instagram. If you'd like to email the show, it's myhorrorconfessional@gmail.com. And yeah, I do have a Patreon as well. Hillary and I will be continuing our conversation on the Patreon exclusive Sunday school sessions. So if you'd like to support me there, it's patreon.com/myhorrorconfessional. Thank you everybody for listening, and we will talk to you next week. Say bye. Wait, who's
Bye,
that?
everyone.
When did that change?
You
No.
didn't see? This is
Oh,
Lisa
did you just do it?
Frankenstein.
I wasn't paying attention.
I just in the
Okay.
last couple minutes. Isn't that like a
Yeah,
gas?
it's a pretty sick picture. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Live spooky, die spooky.